We are in the season after Pentecost, commonly called by the Church Ordinary Time. But as we all know, this is no ordinary time. It is an extraordinary time within which we are seeing great movements of God's Spirit that are turning our world upside down. It is an extraordinary time in which a worldwide pandemic caused by the COVID-19 virus is revealing the many intricate ways in which human beings are connected to one another around the world. It is an extraordinary time in which many of the systemic evils with which we all live and conscious and unconsciously collude are being exposed. And we are being forced to recognize that although slavery was abolished in the British Empire in 1835 and in the United States in 1865, the terrible reality of racism still persists and grows. The murder of George Floyd by a policeman's knee to his neck occurred this year on May 25th, in the middle of the pandemic. It was 6 days before we at St. John's and Christians all over the world celebrated Pentecost, the extraordinary outpouring of the Holy Spirit upon a frightened gathering of Jesus' disciples 2,000 years ago. The brutal and completely public murder of George Floyd has released another outpouring of spirit, filled with hurt and anger, but also filled with an underlying belief in the dignity of every human life and a persistent hope for greater things. Every day, crowds have gathered in the streets of America, grieving, raging, speaking, singing, teaching, mourning the countless deaths of Black human beings at the hands of the police and the systems of the state. In the city of Portland, people gathered every day for 76 days today, and when the federal agents descended over 3 weeks ago under the pretense of quelling the riots taking over Portland, thousands upon thousands came out peacefully in defense of the people's right to raise grievances with the government freely and without fear. And in the midst of it all, the great American civil rights leader and member of Congress, John Lewis, died on July the 17th. His funeral was held on July 30th with many remembrances of a great and meaningful life. Why am I bringing these thoughts before you on this particular Sunday when we hear the beginning of the story of Joseph? Well, what jumped out at me upon reading this story at this moment in our history was the very matter-of-fact way in which slavery is just taken for granted. The trade caravan goes by, and the brothers say to one another, "Let's not kill him. Let's just get rid of him by selling him into slavery." It reminded me that the enslavement of human beings has been an economic driver for a great part of human history, a very, very long time, and along with it has come the need to demean and dehumanize those who are enslaved. The story of Joseph is of a slave who ultimately became master. It's a kind of fairy tale. We will be focusing on the rest of his story next week, but for now, I want you to listen to the last words of John Lewis, a descendant of slaves and an American civil rights leader who went to jail numerous times for civil disobedience. John Lewis was a follower of Jesus and a lifelong member of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. He was a man of faith who selflessly risked life and limb in the sacred cause of truth-telling and justice-making in the world. He was a humble man, filled with the power of the Holy Spirit, who, in our day, played his own part in the coming reign of God's reign. Like Joseph in the ancient story that Jesus would have heard at his mother's knee, John Lewis rose to the seat of power where he gained the respect of several former presidents who spoke at his funeral. His own last words were addressed to all the young people on the streets. Listen to his call to walk with the wind.
John Lewis's last words appeared in the New York Times today in an essay that he wrote shortly before his death, intending it to be published on the day of his funeral. Here is that essay, read for us today by John Lewis's friend and admirer, Morgan Freeman.
While my time here has now come to an end, I want you to know that in the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. You filled me with hope about the next chapter of the great American story when you used your power to make a difference in our society. Millions of people motivated simply by human compassion laid down the burdens of division. Around the country and the world, you've set aside race, class, age, language, and nationality to demand respect for human dignity. That is why I had to visit Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, though I was admitted to the hospital the following day. I just had to see and feel it for myself, that after many years of silent witness, the truth is still marching on. Emmett Till was my George Floyd. He was my Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. He was 14 when he was killed, and I was only 15 years old at the time. I will never, ever forget the moment when it became so clear that he could easily have been me. In those days, fear constrained us like an imaginary prison, and troubling thoughts of potential brutality committed for no understandable reason were the bars. Though I was surrounded by two loving parents, plenty of brothers, sisters, and cousins, their love could not protect me from the unholy oppression waiting just outside that family circle. Unchecked, unrestrained violence and government-sanctioned terror had the power to turn a simple stroll to the store for some Skittles or an innocent morning jog down a lonesome country road into a nightmare. If we are to survive as one unified nation, we must discover what so readily takes root in our hearts that could rob Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina of her brightest and best, shoot unwitting concert-goers in Las Vegas, and choke to death the hopes and dreams of a gifted violinist like Elijah McClain. Like so many young people today, I was searching for a way out, or some might say a way in. And then I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on an old radio. He was talking about the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. He said we are all complicit when we tolerate injustice. He said it is not enough to say it will get better by and by. He said each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, speak up, and speak out. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key, The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. You must also study and learn the lessons of history because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change, and that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements stretching across the globe, because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence, is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide.